everybody. Welcome back to the Dicebearers podcast. Today we're going to be talking about the survivors of Lake Town. I'm joined once again by Chris. How are you doing?
I am very well today. How are you?
Very well. I am a good well. That's how many wells I have. I'm very excited to talk about this because this is one of my favorite armies today we're talking about.
Yes.
A really lovely model range, great rules, great thematics, just great in general, I think.
Yes, I think I really enjoy this army list. I'm a little bit scarred from playing against you too many times, I think, with it.
I think everyone who played against this list is scarred, I'll be honest. I remember at HobbyCon, I just people coming up to me like, I've heard about this list. And I was like, let's go.
It's just such an interesting one, right? If you're someone who is a fan of the Hobbit movies, and I know some people will say it's not as good as Lord of the Rings, it's this, that's the other. Like, everyone is entitled to enjoy what they like, right?
I mean, I've only watched 2/3 of them, so.
But, like, it is an army range that is beautifully captured within the model range itself, right? And the actual, like, the movies, the way it all pans out, the ragtag bunch of guys who look so out of place, it's perfectly captured in the rules and in the models.
I mean, I just think it's a really cool model range aesthetic to have in a game like this. Having an army that's not an army, essentially. And there's a few others like it. Funnily enough, I play one of those. I play Corsairs as well. Confounding, absolutely confounding. But I think that it's nice to have that contrast between actual proper forces and you know, these ragtag groups of dudes trying to make it happen. And this one makes a little bit more sense than Corsairs with some of this stats.
It really does.
Let's be honest. Fight 4 pirates like, yeah, I'm better than to train Gondorian. Yeah, because I'm a swashbuckler. But let's get into the model range. It is a beautiful range, I think. And there's some, you know, downsides because a lot of it is resin, but it's not too bad as well. I think the only ones I had trouble with are the Lake Town Guard. And I think one of the cool things about this army and this range is that using models from the Lake Town Guard is not only cool, it's encouraged by the game. Yeah. And I also think incorporating a couple of Warriors of Dale is also a way of making the army cheaper and having less fine cast models in your army. But also another great way to add to that ragtag feel. Like, to me, the mental justification is that some number of people who were Dale survived. You know, their grandparents had this stuff, and you know, war's coming. Oh, I'm gonna put on Grandpa's cloak and shoot up some orcs. You know, I think it's a pretty cool thematic story to have as a part of this kind of army. I think it fits.
Yeah, I think the part that makes this army so flavorful is the work that goes into converting. I think this is an army that you can get away with having humans holding dwarven weaponry, holding elven shields, holding even orc weaponry at times. Like, this is an army that really benefits from creating something that is definitively yours. And, like, we can see Alexa's models in the bottom photo there. There was a bunch of shield swaps, there's a bunch of weapon swaps, there's a bunch of all sorts of bits and pieces that make the models go from being cool, they just look a bit ragtag, to wow, every model actually feels like unique.
I think I have like 25-ish unique poses / weapon combos. Like, I think the Lake Town Guard are the most similar in terms of posing, but I've tried to give them at least different shields or have a couple axes on them or something like that, so that basically if I have a 30 model army, which it was with one of the lists I do, it's basically all unique poses on the Lake Town side or unique combos of weapons and things. And I think that's a really fun thing to do. Beyond that, I think that all the character models, especially the Forge World ones, look great. I think that the Lake Town Warriors look great. Army of Lake Town, great. Warriors of Dale, we've talked about them already. Beautiful kits. The only model I dislike a little bit is the Bard model. I don't like the running sword pose. I think if you get the Windlands pose, which I have here at the front of my set, I think it's a really cool one. I think that the running with the sword doesn't look great. The horse one looks alright. I think the best thing to do with it is if you get the Warriors of Dale kit and there's a couple of bows that work really well on attaching to his body with a little bit of, chopping and green stuffing, so you can get him having a bow instead of having the sword out, and I think that makes for a really great look. And I think, head swaps, weapon swaps across the entire board and just make for a really unique looking army.
Yeah, definitely. And I think another really cool thing I love about this army, as we'll get into a bit later in the episode as well, is because it allies into so many forces, it just fits really nicely in that, pocket of you can make it look like this army. You can make it look similar to the dwarves because you're allying dwarves in. You can make it look similar to the elves because you're going with elves. You can do fun stuff and have the army really offset to them or really similar to them. You can really streamline how you want your army's overall presentation to look, based entirely around how you're actually converting up these models.
Yeah, so beautiful model range. I've got very few complaints other than the general stuff that comes with fine cast, but it's not too bad in this case.
And yes, it's definitely there, and there are fine cast models in the range, but when you're mixing that into an entire army list, it's whatever, having a few handful of models here and there. Like a fully resin army, that would be a different issue. I know I've definitely had my issues with majority resin armies, either in Lord of the Rings itself or in other systems. But I think it is a good army range, and I love it. So, yeah, let's jump into what we think the strengths and weaknesses are.
Alright, so the list overview. So the main strengths of this army is it has a really wide pool of interesting hero options. You have, like 4 or 5 different named heroes, which each bring their own unique strengths to the table. And that also comes along with bringing you a really high might pool. There's a few different ways you can get a lot of might into this list, and it's pretty easy to do, and it's pretty coherent with how you're building your list generally. And finally, the backbone of this army is really solid, cheap troops with basically points in all the places you want them, which I think is the key thing on what makes them really solid. What about the weaknesses, Chris?
Yeah, so there's a couple of very, very big weaknesses. The biggest one that stands out is a low defense value. Basically what that means is your troops and your heroes both suffer from the same issue here. So your heroes, although they're dirt cheap, and although your troops can be really affordable as well, you just end up dying in drones if you're going into a high strength matchup. And if your models are losing fights more than they're winning them, you're just going to be losing models left, right, and center once combat is joined. The other big issue I see with this army is no cav options. The reality of this army is there's unfortunately only one actual non-hero choice in the army for its troop slot, which means, yes, it's a great troop, yes, it's versatile, but you don't have cav, you don't have elites, you don't have a lot of different things that other armies bring to the table through troop choices.
And you only have one mounted hero too. Only Bard can be mounted, all the other heroes are stuck on foot.
You can bring a cart or another horse with Gandalf.
Oh, you can. That's true. No, you can with Gandalf. You're right. I was talking specifically in that list, but that is Gandalf is a part of this list, and that is that would sort of fall under strengths. I think having access to a wizard is actually really nice.
Yeah.
And this is an army that I think fits a wizard really well, which we'll talk about when we get to our list building and all that. I think it's quite funny to note that most of your heroes are lower defense than your troops.
Yes, I was going to bring that up.
Even Bard is only D5 with armor, which is equivalent to your troops, and then actually, all of your named heroes are lower defense than 5. Most of them are 4 or 3.
Yeah.
Which, come on. We'll get into playing around that and dealing with it, but it is something to be aware when you're playing this army. Your heroes can just go poof.
Yes. We play Harad, we play Corsairs, we're used to it.
I'm used to it. I'm defending a D5 hero with 2 fate, that's pretty easy. Whatever, who cares?
But definitely for people getting into this army or who have been looking at it and not getting the same success as other people have been getting, it can be really challenging to actually play into a matchup where, you're fighting into a Barmy of the White Tower, rocking that defense 7. He's the unkillable block that's going around murderizing all of your heroes at defense 4 or 3. Yeah. It can be really tough to get that momentum swinging.
Most Lance heroes win your heroes on 3s on the charge.
Yeah.
If not, even your toughest hero Bard gets winded on 4s. So.
And it's not about actually, stopping those happening, but actually mitigating them.
Actually, that's not true. Your captain is your highest defense hero because he's D6.
He can bring a shield.
Yeah. Your captain is your highest defense hero in this army.
Oh, that's the worst.
That's hilarious. I think it's brilliant.
Oh, Bilbo's D6. Dude,
True,
Bilbo and the captains.
Bilbo and the captain are your tanks. That's actually ironically the case in this army.
I love it. It's
I don't know if that's a good or a bad sign. Let's go with both.
Yeah, somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
Anyway, we're going to take a quick break and we'll see you guys over in the list review.
Everybody, welcome back to the Dicebearers podcast. We're going to jump straight into the army bonus. So, Bard the Bowman's Standfast will affect other Laketown hero models. Additionally, the range of Bard the Bowman's Savior of Laketown ability is increased to 12 inches. Now, what is Bard the Bowman's Savior of Laketown ability? Well, let's jump into Bard's profile. So, Bard brings us a fight value of 5, strength value of 4, defense value of 4, 3 attacks, 3 wounds, and courage 6. We're bringing all this for 140 points with the Man Laketown Infantry Hero of Legend keywords, with 3 might, 3 will, and 3 fate. His actions are Heroic Resolve, Heroic Accuracy, Heroic Strike, and Heroic Strength. His ward gear is a sword and a great bow. His options are the Windlance for 75 points, Horse for 10 points, and Armor for 5 points. He comes with the Rapid Fire rule, so just like his great ancestor Girion, he's got a machine gun. So if the Bard the Bowman hits the target with his great bow, he may take another shot at a target within 3 inches of it. It may even be the same target. If that shot is also a hit, he may shoot again, up to a maximum of 3 shots. Bard the Bowman also has the Black Arrow special rule, which allows him to, instead of firing the wind lance normally, choose to declare that he is firing the Black Arrow before rolling the hit. When shooting the Black Arrow, Bard the Bowman rerolls all failed hit rolls and any in the way tests. Furthermore, he doesn't scatter, so he gets a successful hit against a battlefield target automatically with the dead-on result. Not too relevant. Wind lance isn't really that great. We've talked about it a lot during our Dale episode. It's just not quite, it just doesn't work out great for the points it costs. His Savior of Laketown rule is that Bard the Bowman Standfast has a range of 6, which is actually 12 with the army bonus. So keep that in mind. Furthermore, Bain, son of Bard, Percy, Hilda Bianca, Laketown Militia captains, and Laketown Militia within 6 of Bard receive a +1 bonus to their fight value and count as being in range of a banner. So, Bard, with the army bonus, is a 12-inch +1 fight banner for everyone that isn't himself, essentially, from this army list. Other notable exceptions on that would be Bilbo and Gandalf and any other allies you bring.
Are the daughters?
The daughters are not in there. They don't get it.
Okay, yeah.
It's only the combat profiles, as it were.
Okay.
So what do we think of this profile, Chris?
I think this is a phenomenal profile. I think it's really well pointed. So essentially, if you're paying 155 points, you get him on a horse with that defense value of 5. 155 points, hero of legend. He's bringing 18 dudes with him. He has a great bow. He's one of the best shooting heroes in the game. In my opinion, it's models like Legolas at that kind of like S triple plus tier. And then he's in that tier above models like Vrasku, because he can have up to 3 shots a turn. Obviously, it's not guaranteed, but a great bow means that you can move 5 inches and shoot.
Yes, that's the big advantages over our Rasku. But yeah, him and Rasku are... I think Haldir would sort of be on the same level as Bard, because you can also move and shoot. And then
but it's only 2 strength 3 shots.
But it's always 2 shots is the main difference.
That is true. That's definitely true.
That's the big... I don't know exactly the math, but it probably works out to on average being about 2 shots a turn. So there's slight little variability, but that's not too big a deal. Regardless, Bard is a really great character for shooting.
Yes, and just quickly, the great bow is just a strength 4 bow.
Yes, 24-inch strength 4 bow, can move and shoot. Just great. Phenomenal.
Yes. It is... it's insane. I didn't know that this guy's Standfast affected hero models.
I did.
Yeah.
It's good.
More you know.
Yeah, it's really important. I mean, it's really important this army because you have a lot of small, fairly low courage value heroes, as we'll get on to in a little bit with some of Bard's upgrades when we get into our next profile. So the thing with Bard is that he is a very solid hero, but and he has access to free hero combats, which we'll also get into, and fight 6. And with that profile essentially coming in at 185 when you factor in the cost of the daughters, he isn't quite killing as much as you'd expect from a 185 point hero. He doesn't have access to a lance. He's only strength 4. 3 attacks is good, but 3 attacks with a sword can fluff.
It's swingy.
It can fluff a lot. It's very solid against D6, but anything higher, he's not really going to kill 2 models a turn.
Yeah.
And even D6, killing 2 models a turn can be optimistic, let's say.
Yes, I think on the charge, keeping momentum going in the game, and this army is one that can really drive momentum because of its might pool.
And the free heroics.
Yes. And the way that this army just synergizes within itself is really good. I think when you're on the offensive, Bard at the front of that, as the bulwark of that offensive, phenomenal. 10 out of 10. When you're playing the game in your hands, the way you want it to be played, he feels very powerful. He feels like you're paying probably less than you actually should be paying for a profile doing as much as he can. When he's on the defensive, however, that's where the cracks really show. Because his killing power won't compete with even just a strength 5 hero.
Or like a foot hero with a 2-handed weapon.
Yes. So there's a model that I run all the time in the Mordor army list called Goroth. He's a strength 5 burly 2-handed orc captain. He is just insane at mulching things, and he is more consistent than a charging bard on horseback. Like, it's just so hard to keep momentum going against things like that, and I think that's where this model can really struggle.
Yeah, and beyond that, he is a model you have to keep alive, which can be tricky at D5. 3 wounds, 3 fate, so he has to take quite a few wounds, but even strength 3 troops can be a threat against him, especially if they can get a trap or if they can just, get him prone somehow.
Yes.
He is fairly vulnerable, and you have to work to keep him alive, because the moment he dies drum, he may as well just collapse.
Yes.
That's the reality of Bard, and the trickiness of him is you want to use him aggressively, because he is your only big killing power, really, in terms of just this list on its own. But at the same time, you have to keep him alive while being, low defense. And we talked about Solidan last week similarly to that.
Yes.
I think Bard has the option to be a lot more aggressive because he gets a fight 6, the 3 heroic combats, the 3 fate. But you still have to keep an eye on him. You have to keep, some sort of backup plan to get him out of trouble nearby, that kind of deal. And that's something that's important to think about when running him. Which you should be doing in this list, essentially, all the time.
Definitely. But unlike with Saladin, the reason why Saladin fits so beautifully into the Haradrim list is because Saladin isn't your only mounted option when it comes to actual combat
Yes,
power.
there's a lot more pressure on Bard to get kills.
Yes, and Bard has to be at the center of that killing field.
Yes.
And, the way that interacts with your game holistically, the 12-inch definitely means that it's actually not that hard to get him in the right position.
It's pretty reliable to get him covering even 2 fights essentially.
Yeah, it's you can fight on either side of a big line of sight blocking terrain feature and have that banner effect still umbrellaing over the top of it.
Yeah, especially if you position that secondary force to do that. It's something you have to keep in mind to sort of position around the banner equally, especially if you want to play a multi-front force.
Definitely, yes. Once you learn it, but getting to that initial hurdle of actually understanding that positioning and where you should and shouldn't be plugging the gap with him compared to someone like Percy is, I think, the hard part of this.
To me, this was the model that made me hesitate on the side. I was really interested in playing this because the model line, and then reading Bard's profile, maybe this is my leader.
Yeah,
but once you get the hang of him, he is a very powerful profile, especially the bow. Picking off 2 or 3 guys before the start even comes in can be very frustrating for your opponent. And then the 3 heroics and the tempo you can build off of him and some of the other options we'll talk about in a bit is really important. Now,
yes,
Chris, let's talk about his 30-point upgrade. And it is a 30-point upgrade to Bard.
Yes, 100%.
Can you tell us about Sigrid and Tilda?
So Sigrid and Tilda are 30 points. You buy them together. So the same way you might buy the twins from Rivendell or Mion and Dra from Iron Hills, they are a 30-point package. They are women, Lake Town, infantry, and independent heroes. So Sigrid is a movement of 6, fight of 2, strength of 2, defense of 2, 1 attack, 1 wound, courage 4. She has 0 points of might, 1 point of will, and 2 points of fate. Tilda, the younger of the 2 daughters, has an almost identical stat line. So she is a movement 6, fight of only 1, strength of 2, defense of 2, 1 attack, 1 wound, courage of only 3, 0 might, 1 will, and 2 fate. Sigrid and Tilda may only be included in your army if it includes Bard the Bowman or Bain. And I believe they must be...
They have to join one of their warbands.
Yeah, so they cannot be placed independently, unfortunately. That would definitely be a trick that we would try to pull off, I think, but that's okay. And they have a down here passive rule.
So they're unarmed, important.
Oh, they are not. Yes,
that's a big part of it too.
They're non-combatants, basically.
Well, they're trapping pieces, but we'll get into some tactics with them later. Yeah, yes. Let's get into the actual important rules for them, though.
So Bard, the Bowman, and Bain, son of Bard, receive a bonus of +1 fight value if either of these models are within 6 inches of one of them. Additionally to that, if Bard the Bowman or Bain is within 6 inches of both of these models, they may call a heroic combat without reducing their pool of might. They also have, however, another special rule called something to fight for. This one is unfortunately nothing but a negative. So basically what happens is if either one of the daughters are killed, Bard the Bowman automatically passes his courage test and must move straight towards and kill the model that slew them.
If it's possible, if 2 models are the target of the rage, Bard will target the closest first, after which he will search for the second model. Once both models are slain, Bard must continue to move as fast as possible towards the nearest enemy model for the rest of the game, charging if possible. Basically, you have to charge. If you can charge the model that killed the daughters, you have to charge them. Otherwise, you have to get as close as possible. This means you can try and get charges in onto the models, if it's a second row model for whatever reason. If the closest place you can be to that model is the front model in front of them, you can charge the model in front of them. There's a few little tricks to negating the negatives of this, but it is very bad if one of the daughters dies. It's potentially game losing, potentially not, depending on the exact state of the game. Yeah. But it is very important to keep them protected. That being said, the upside is huge.
I mean, huge. +1 fight.
I mean, even the +1 fight. we've talked about how important Fight 6 is as a stat. That Fight 6 is the sort of huge breakpoint where you jump from being mediocre to being good in terms of being a hero, especially like a named hero.
Well, I don't think it's going from mediocre to good. I think it goes from being Fight 5 is good because that's
for a named hero. For a leader type hero.
I think there's more Fight 5s than there are Fight 6s.
Exactly, so mediocre to good.
I think like Fight 5 is a fantastic starting point, but just pushing yourself up to Fight 6, suddenly you're pushing into that like bracket that Boromir or Aragon and like models like that are actually pushing.
Yes, you're pushing into the actual 200 plus hero range.
Yes,
which you're paying close to it, so it makes sense because the way I think of them is they are literally a 30-point upgrade to Bard.
Yes. Like the argument is there that they're a 20-point upgrade and 10 points if you bring the sun as well, but
the thing is they also come with the tricky downsides, which is why I wouldn't say they're like you can make arguments the exact value of them, quote unquote. They are a very solid thing to bring. I think I would bring them almost all of the time, especially if I'm bringing both Bard and Bain. If for whatever reason I'm not bringing both, that's when I'd consider not bringing them. Like if I was allying Lake Town to another list and I wanted to bring Bard and 18 dudes, or Bard and 17 dudes and one of the other children, who we'll get onto soon enough.
Yes.
The extended family. Then I'd maybe not bring them. Like bringing Bard and 18 guys, Bard at Fight 5 for only 155. That's a solid way to bring him. I actually don't think the daughters are a must bring. But especially if you're going pure Lake Town and you're bringing both Bard and Bain, then the advantages they bring get really high. The other thing to consider with them is essentially having a little child protection services squad with them most of the time. Once lines have met, just a couple of guys getting in behind is all it takes to take them out pretty easily. It'll probably take 2 combats because they do have the 2 fate, which is a nice little safety barrier, but one you preferably don't want to rely on. I think generally speaking, you want to just have 2 or 3 models, making sure that, whatever model is trying to get into your backline can't actually get them without at least expending, might or something to get into them.
Yeah.
But even then, I think, if there's like a hero coming around the back, having a double layer of Lake Towners blocking that hero to deny them a turn and leave them out of position for you to come back next turn, or to use those heroic combats that you're getting from Bain and Bard to come defend them. I think those are all the sort of things you need to keep in mind as well, because it's very easy to just lose one of these, and then Bard runs off 10 inches and no one else can keep up with him.
Yes, I've seen it happen in not only games that we've played, but just games with Bard on tables in general, where you see like a daughter get sniped out in one of the early turns to a really unlucky bow shot through 7 in the ways. Or like I've seen it happen where the daughters were placed into Bane's warband in a Maelstrom game, and they got sniped, and Bard literally was 40 inches away, and was like, okay.
Now let's talk about some mitigation tactics. My favorite is the Bard cage.
Yes.
So Bard has a great bow. If whatever killed them is a shooting model that's in relatively open line of sight, you cage Bard and you shoot. You burn all your might to kill whatever it is, just so that because the reality is if they're far away, one model can just leave the rest of the army and go sit in the corner, and Bard is just gone. So if that's something that's looking to happen, you don't actually want Bard moving. You want to put Bard in a cage of 3 guys so that he literally cannot move, and then he shoots. And you use whatever might, whatever you have to just try and take that model out, so that you don't have control of Bard. And that is something you can also just generally do by moving. You don't have to move Bard first. He can be the last model you move. So essentially, moving your line to corral the Bard. If put him in the second rank and then use your line to direct his movement to slow him down so that the rest of your line can keep up with him, is something you can sort of do to mitigate if they get sniped. Generally speaking, I think they shouldn't get sniped unless very particular models are on the table, like Legolas maybe or something along those lines. And even then, if that's the case, you maybe just leave them in a house. Like you leave them literally out of line of sight till Legolas is combat locked every turn, and then they walk out 2 or 3 turns into combat and you pull out the buffs then.
Yes, and that's the thing, right? You don't need these people in the lines the whole game.
Yes.
You can keep them 12 inches behind and run them forward when you guys are 1 turn away from the combat. And at that point, they're 7 or 8 inches behind the rest of your line. And the next turn, when you move into that combat with your opponent, you've probably moved 4 to 5 inches forward. Suddenly, they're just cresting the edge of Bard's heroic range.
Yes, exactly. That's the thing with them is you don't have to walk them with your line. You can keep them off to the side, hide them in buildings, break line of sight as much as possible. Playing smart with them is really important. I think it's one of the hardest part of this army is protecting these two.
Yes, definitely.
It requires a lot of foresight. You need to look at where they are and look at any possible breaks in your line and think 2 or 3 turns from now, where do these daughters need to be to be safe and to be effective? Where does Bard want to be moving with his heroic combats? Where does Bain want to be going? Where do they need to be to support them 3 turns from now? That's sort of the trickiest part of this army, I think, to learn, because it's a unique mechanic. I don't think very many banners are kind of similar to that, but banners are a lot easier to keep alive than these are.
Yes, you can't pass a daughter to another model when it dies, unfortunately.
Exactly.
Yes.
And the ramifications for losing them are way larger.
Yeah, definitely.
Now, onto our next profile. It is Bain, son of Bard. So, Bain is a 40-point man Lake Town infantry hero. He is a minor hero, so can only bring 6 guys with him. Movement of 6, fight of 3, but not really. We'll get into that. Strength of 3, defense of 3, 1 attack, 2 wounds, and courage 4. A might of 1, a will of 3, a fight of 2. He comes with a sword. He has the action of strike and the family bond special rule. While he's been 6 of Bard, he gains a bonus of +1 to his courage. So going up to courage 5, which is really good. That being said, Bain is not fight 3. Bain is fight 5. Bain is an elven warrior.
Unfortunately so, yes.
With heroic combats for free.
Yes.
So, the thing with Bain is that because of the way the buffs stack, Bard gives him +1 fight for being within 12 of him, and the daughters give him +1, which takes him all the way to fight 5, which we've talked about, big breakpoint for going into infantry. And then those free heroic combats mean that he can offset the low fight of your whole army by basically being in 2 fights every turn.
Yes.
And that's your goal with him. You want him to try. He's not gonna, I mean, he has strike. He can go in and be your strike hero onto other heroes. And he has some good synergy with another hero we're going to talk about in a moment. You know, but I think the best way to use him is to take him with one of your sort of mid-tier heroes, like your captain or Percy or whatever. Have them fight 2 combats every turn, because between Bain and that, and maybe a spear spot or 2, you can get pretty reliable kills. And spread as much of your, you know, relatively higher fight across the field.
Yes, and I think that's the secret to making this model work, right? It's the way I love seeing this model played. I think you do this really well, Alexa. Is you take this model into a fight with 2 or 3 other Lake Towners that they're basically guaranteed to win and get the kill on that model, and then heroic combat that model around and bring that fight 5 into another combat that matters. The amount of time I lose fight 4 models that I thought were safe and in a good spot to Bard just tapping his fight value into the fight, even though it's only 1 attack, even though it's only just a sword, it only actually matters that you're winning that fight.
Yeah.
Because it means no matter what, I, the person playing Bain, am never going to lose a model because I just won the fight. And even if you haven't killed that second model, even if it doesn't translate to a kill, it translates to you slowing down your opponent. And the longer the game goes, the more powerful 2 free heroic combats a turn becomes.
Yes.
Because if you're getting 1 or 2 kills a turn with Bain, and you're getting 2 or 3 kills a turn with Bard, suddenly that's let's say you're doing it poorly, right? And you're getting 4 kills a turn with both models in both heroic combats.
Combined, yeah.
Combined, right? And if your total kills out of those 2 models is 4 per turn, your opponent suddenly needs a roughly 200 point thing that is going to be creating 4 kills a turn consistently as well.
Yeah.
And that's the secret, right? Your opponent probably doesn't. Like,
there's very few things that can.
Yes.
They usually are like god tier models, like an Elendil.
But even then, right? Elendil charges 2 models, calls a heroic combat, probably gets peeled into a 1v1 in his next combat.
Yes.
Elendil, one of the best free heroic combat killing machines in the entire game, one of the best killers in the game, is killing 3 on average a turn.
Yeah.
These guys are consistently giving you access to 4 and giving you the possible options of up to 6 sometimes.
Being split across 2 models is actually really
It's just
useful.
crazy. And they're so cheap.
I think Bain is the hidden workhorse of this army. I don't think he's unnecessarily cheap. As a profile himself, without the support of other models, he has no impact. Which is why he is so cheap at 40 points. There's a few other neat things about him. The fact that he is courage 5 is pretty good. You know, great for standfast. And while Bard is also a great hero for standfasts, you know, having a backup in case he gets tied up is really nice.
Yes.
And also great for charging terror models. Being a courage 5 again, very solid. And yeah, just overall, he has a really large impact across the game if used well. Again, he is another tricky model to use. This army is full of a lot of these minor heroes that have a very low points cost, but are also very important and very tricky to use.
Yes,
because you have no bigger heroes to use. That's the thing. You know, this is your second most impactful hero in terms of killing power, realistically.
Yeah,
and he's 1 attack at strength 3.
It's so interesting watching how this model works, because when I first started playing against this army, my number 1 target every single time, without a doubt, was always Bard. And then I realized if I kill Bain first and force the daughters to actually then start hiding and playing defensively, it means that Bard, even though he is still fight 6 with free heroic combats, has to also play defensively. And that was kind of my shortcut into breaking this list when I was playing against it. It's how do I pick apart Bain? How do I force one of the 3 other kids into a bad spot? And it can be tricky to get it right as the person on the other side of the table to this army, but it can also be just as tricky to get it right as the person playing with this army.
Yeah, there's a lot of intricacies to using these heroes. Now, on to the best member of the family.
Yes.
Alfred, take it away, Chris. What does Alfred do for us?
So, for a humble 20 points, you get Alfred the Counselor. He is a man, Lake Town infantry hero. He's an independent hero, and he can be put on his own, which I love. So, usually he'll end up in Bard's Warband, which is fine. But for that 20 points, you get a movement 6, fight 3, strength 3, defense 3, 1 attack, 1 wound, courage 3, 0 might, 3 will, and 1 fate point.
Oh.
Alfred is unarmed, and he has a rule that makes him 20 points from being expensive to being hugely impactful, which is called Dubious Counsel. Alfred can choose to expend any number of will points at the start of the priority phase, before any dice are rolled. For each point of will he expends, nominate a single friendly Lake Town hero model within 6 inches, and roll a d6. For each roll of a 2 or more, the nominated Lake Town hero model gains a point of might. However, on the roll of a 1, the nominated Lake Town hero loses a point of might, and Alfred gains a single point of might. Might gained in this way cannot take the take the chosen hero above their starting level. This rule turns a 20-point profile into just an absolutely insane purchase for the army.
It's 20 points for +3 might, essentially.
Yes.
Is the way you should look at it, which I think is very solid.
And for those wondering, but it's only on a 2+, is it really always 3 points of might?
We're going to get big brain here. All right, listen up, lads. There is nothing saying that the target of this ability has to have might. Which basically means that if you target a 0 might hero, no matter what you roll, you will gain a point of might. Because all it says is that Alfred gains a point of might if you roll a 1.
Yes.
Which means that if, targeting 0 might heroes guarantees you will get might off Alfred's Dubious Counsel. Now, this isn't always ideal. Sometimes you're going to want to put it, if you got a 1 might bard and he's going into some big fight, you might want to just take the risk, put him on the 2. But at the same time, there's a lot of different ways you can use it. The versatility on how you can use him is interesting. I think when I first started playing him, my initial thought was, I say Bard, and I put 3 might on him, and I go for Bardomir, the 6/3/3 god.
Yes.
And that can be very powerful, but you're risking, generally every second game, you're probably going to lose one of those might. So you'll be 4 might Bard and 1 might Alfred, which is not bad, but at the same time, you're also risking just crushing yourself to being a 0 might Bard and a 3 might Alfred. I think, the way I would go about it is if you want to stack Bard early for maybe a contest of champions or a mission where you have to play quick, is I would do 2 on my first roll so that at worst Bard will have at least 1 might.
Yeah.
But most of the time you'll end up on 5 and then keep that last one for those, tricks. That's where heroes like Bain, where they have only a single point of might, are really good. Bain goes in, calls a strike, calls a move, whatever, he goes down to 0 and then Alfred tops them up immediately.
Yeah.
I think, he's got a lot of interesting ways to use him.
Yeah, I think this is exactly how I want to see this model used most, is sitting in that second rank, and as you are moving through your turns and preparing how your combat phase is going to look, if you know that Percy's about to drop his last point of might, or that you're going to use Bane's might point for a strike, not a combat this turn, or if Bard's starting to run low, just bring Alfred out, top him up for that 1 turn on the priority, then run him back undercover in the movement phase. Get him into the right positions early in the turn, use that might point, or use that will point to turn into a might point, then get him back into the rest of the army.
Ironically, sometimes him having a might is actually really good.
Yes.
There are a lot of games where he has a single point of might, and I'm like, yes, because what he can do, because he doesn't have to fight to have any impact in the game, he can stand in spots where you want to call a move from. He is a great, because there's something about having a hero who doesn't need to be in the front to be your move caller, because it just gives you a lot of options and versatility, and that's really nice. Obviously you can't reliably get it except when we get to some memes. But you know what I'm talking about. It'll be good times. But he has a lot of really, good, useful impact across the game, and very versatile. I think he's not auto include like the daughters are, depending on what you're bringing Bard in this army for. But I'd maybe even put him above the daughters, depending on exactly what your game plan is and the points level. They're both, maybe even preference, I would say. They're both very good, like, initial upgrade options. And then once you get to 600, 750 points, I think you bring both him and the daughters most of the time in a primarily Lake Town focus list, because they both bring a lot to that.
Yeah. In my opinion, this army starts at 220 points. A captain with a shield, Bard with the horse and armor, and Alfred. I think that is the perfect starting point of almost any list that includes Lake Town models.
Yeah, I can get behind that. Now, on to our next profile, something slightly different. We got Hilda Bianca. So, Hilda is a 30-point woman Lake Town infantry hero of Fortitude, with a move of 6, a fight of 2, strength of 3, defense of 3, 1 attack, 2 wounds, and courage 5, with 1 might, 1 will, 1 fate. She comes with a spear and the heroic strength action. So, pretty weak profile overall, not very good at fighting. Whatever. The thing that makes her interesting is her special rule, stand by our men. If Hilda Bianca charges, then during the ensuing fight phase, Hilda Bianca and Lake Town Militia within 3 of her gain a bonus of +1 to wound if they charge this turn. This is a pretty powerful buff. It essentially gives you two-handed on charging models. The tricky part of it is it has to be charging models. She has to be charging, and it's only a 3-inch bubble. So there's a lot of limitations on it. That being said, it comes on a very cheap hero. What do you think, Chris?
I think this model is low-key one of the cheekiest models in the game. Like, if you can get this model to work in the way you want it to, and we wrote a list a bit later on that we'll see that I think utilizes a profile like this beautifully. I think if you can get her working in the way that she's intended to be, of, a spear supporting for the turn or two, and then on that turn you really want to go for that coup de grace. You have both, Bard and Bain on one flank, and you're going for the double combats, and you're really going to punch a hole, chuck her into the front line that turn. And, commit to the move off with her, or with Percy, or with a captain, or with Bard, or with Bain, or someone in your list. And if you win that move off, just commit. Do the charges, get that fight going, and get that +1 to wound bonus on all of those troops. It's crazy to think how powerful this bonus can be. Yes, it's not on any of your heroes, but it's okay because your heroes have other ways of negating that, i.e. picks or higher strength initially and things like that. They have ways of negating that imbalance, I should say. And so I think this model is phenomenal. I think there's a lot of ways you can use her, but she's incredibly hard to get right.
The tricky part with her is that she has to charge and commit herself. And because of your relatively low fight, 3 inches maybe gets you 6 to 7 fights. You're maybe going to win 2 to 3 of those on average.
Yes.
If it's not a Bain fight or a Bar fight, etc. No characters involved. But but the characters don't even benefit from this, so they're not even necessarily the best fights to have them for. So she can be quite tricky to use because that once she's committed, she's fight 3 technically because she should be within 12 of Bard, so she should get +1 to fight. But, fight 3, defense 3, and 2 wounds with 1 fate. 2 orcs, fighting her,
have a decent chance of just popping
her in 1 or 2 turns of combat.
Yeah.
That's the tricky part of her. Keeping her near Bain is a good option. Having her heroic combat with him is a good way. Like, if she didn't charge for whatever reason, if she got tied up but other models charged, you can heroic combat her and then, take Hilda out and put her somewhere else. I guess, actually, you could get cheeky. You could charge her and Bain, and then heroic combat her off somewhere else to transfer the +3 across the fight, because technically she's charged this turn, and then all the other charging models would get it.
Yeah, but it kind of means that you have to.
But you have to commit Bain with her then, and he's not.
Yes.
Maybe there's a lot of little caveats to using her.
You have 2 1-attack heroes,
and then you're probably gonna put 2 spears behind them. Then it gets really hard to move her out. Yeah, it's tricky. There's a lot of trickiness to using her effectively. I do think she's a very solid model, especially I think 400 to 500 point games where there aren't too many heroes that are gonna be hunting her. That's where her impact is biggest, because the smaller the game, the bigger this impact is. Because it's a very small scale buff.
Yes.
But at those 400 to 500 point games, I think this army will heavily outnumber most armies based on what you're bringing.
Oh, most definitely.
Which means that you're going to be winning more fights than you would at maybe higher points, where because of what you bring at higher points with this, it's maybe less likely to be heavily outnumbered unless you go for very specific lists.
Yeah.
Which you can. But I think it's very tricky to use her at those higher points, but at 400 to 500 points, she is a steal. And being a hero of Fortitude is really good as well. She's a great model to sort of, if you want to bring a lot of cheap bodies to some of the more elite Hobbit armies that this army is green with, Her and Percy as like a 2-hero combo, or her and a captain, are a great way to bring 24 really cheap models to armies like Iron Hills and Thranduils, which are sort of held back by being really expensive.
Yes. Like, this
That's
is...
something to consider with her.
Yes, this is the way you bring, like, the Goblin Mercs equivalent.
Yeah, this is the good equivalent of Goblin Mercenaries, yeah.
Like, it literally is just, like, extremely cheap heroes that have access and synergy within the models they bring, and they're bringing cheap, reliable troops with them. They're just a great combo piece.
Yeah. All right, Chris, take it away with Bilbo Baggins.
Yes, so we have Bilbo Baggins, the master burglar himself. He is a hobbit infantry hero. In this list, he's actually a hero of fortitude, which is really interesting. He's 90 points for the privilege. He is only movement 4, traditional of hobbits. He's a fight 3, 3 plus shoot value, does come in handy. He's strength 2, defensive 6, 1 attack, 2 wounds, courage of 6. He has 3 might, 3 fate, and 3 will points. I don't know why I said that out of order, but that's okay. He has as his war gear the One Ring, so he has a special rule with that as well, which I'll get to in a moment. He has a mithril coat, which adds 3 to his defense value. That has already been included in his current profile, so he doesn't go to defense 9, he stays at defense 6. And Sting, of course. Sting is an elven blade for all intents and purposes. He has heroic strike, he has heroic defense, and he has heroic resolve as his heroics. He has resistance to magic, he has throw stones, range of 8, and strength of 1. And his other special rule is it has not yet awoken, which means that Bilbo Baggins ignores Sauron's will section of the One Ring. Furthermore, if Bilbo Baggins is the only model left on the controlling player's side and wearing the ring, he is not removed as a casualty as he normally would be. Something to remember with Sting as well is you also get a +1 to your strength value when you're making strikes with him. So he strikes at strength 3, just like Glamdring turns Gandalf into a strength 5 striker. What are your thoughts?
He's solid. He's a good option. He's also tricky to use. I think that you sort of imagine him just running in and tagging heroes and just being untouchable because of the ring. It's not quite that cut and dry, but for 90 points, you get a good might pool, a bunch of really good actions. He's survivable, relatively. He doesn't kill a lot, but he is great at shutting down, big heroes. Like, the ring, which we should probably talk about what the ring does exactly. The main feature of the ring, it comes with invisibility, as you would expect. Which basically means that models must take a courage test to charge that cannot be ignored by Fearless, and that is has a -1 modifier for every inch away they are from Bilbo, or from whatever ring bearer. And then he can move through models, ignoring them, basically like he flies. And then he has the ability to halve the fight value. Is it just fight value, not attacks?
Just fight value, yeah.
The fight value of anyone he is in combat with. That's what he does, and that's really, really impactful when fighting big name heroes, which his army can struggle with. Bard and Bain are relatively high fight, but they're also relatively fragile. You don't necessarily want to throw him into a strength 5 mounted hero, especially if they have like a +1 to wound from something on his own, because that can be a really risky proposition. That's gonna be you're gonna be trading really poorly over the course of 3 or 4 turns in terms of wound rolls. But having Bilbo there changes the equation a lot.
Yes, and I think what turns this model from a really expensive, probably slightly over-costed model to just an absolute bargain is the way that Elven Blade and Ring interact with each other. So yes, he's only fight 3, but the Elven Blade means that he wins the fights on a 3+, and if he calls that strike, all he needs to roll is a 2 to go to essentially fight 10. Because if something he's fighting against is at fight 10, he halves that. So all he needs to do is hit fight 5, which is not very hard. On a 3+, you become essentially fight 11. Like, you become the highest fight in the game, just because you rolled a 3 when you call a heroic strike. Bard, if he's near one of the kids, is automatically fight 11. It changes the dynamic of how this list wants to play if Bilbo is in your list. There's a few big limitations to this model, being that he has a move value of 4. It just means he's so hard to keep in the line in the spots you want. I think realistically you have to kind of call heroic combats to move him around in the early steps of the combats to actually get him to the actual coup de grace spots later in the game, or just be willing to play a super long drawn out game where you're not doing any moving because you have overwhelming bow shots.
I mean, it really should say Bilbo Baggins, Master Assassin here. Like, he can, go in for a little cheeky little trap by walking through someone's bases, ignoring collision, and then just set up for crazy kills that, are relatively difficult to do otherwise. And it kind of, like you say, it changes up what you're going for. Generally speaking, Bard and Bain are troop killers, but when you combo them with a Bilbo, suddenly, they can pretty easily, cross 2 or 3 turns. And the thing that makes him so good is that his effect is constant and doesn't cost resources, which means that you can go for 2 or 3 turns. Normally, 2 or 3 turns of strike off drains a lot of resources. 2 or 3 turns of Bilbo being in contact with someone, it costs you 90 points, but you after you're done killing whatever hero you haven't actually lost any resources, as it were, other than time. But
you can neuter so many expensive heroes with it. Like, yes, he's 90 points. That's a lot, right? You can literally use him to just shut heroes out of the game.
I mean, you can even use it as a sacrifice piece. Just run him into like a Gilgalad, sit there for 4 turns. You trade 90 points for his 220 while the rest of the elves die around him. Like, you take that to trade any time. Just because you haven't killed a hero doesn't mean you haven't, dealt with them.
Yeah, I think the one problem I see with this model is the one attack means that, yes, you have 3 points of fate, and you have the 2 wounds. He can play a little bit of that roadblock sort of thing, especially with her defense in there, but he's only 1 attack. He's really not going to be doing a lot, especially winning fights on his own. He needs that support around him.
He needs a spear support because he's not a Lake Town model. Well, he's not even, specifically, he's not included in the model's bard effects with his rule. So he needs to have someone with him to gain a banner effect, which I think is also important to note.
Yeah, like him with a spear support goes from 1 dice to 3 dice. And that's a huge difference.
Yes, so I think at least always have a spear behind Bilbo. Maybe even, like, depending on what you're taking him into. I mean, him and a guy with 2 spears behind them trying to just knock out someone's horse is a pretty solid way to run it. Just call a strike, take out their horse, and then leave the hero dismounted. Yes. Again, dismounting big-name heroes really cripples their killing power a lot of the time. So just taking that and then just Bilbo runs off to, look for another hero to assassinate,
Yeah, it's really cheeky the way you can use him, but I think the threshold for using him well is also really high.
Another one of these small heroes with high potential impact that's really hard to access.
Yes, and I think the biggest barrier with him is he comes at the 90-point caveat. Like, that's a big investment cost to actually bring him into a list like this one, where all of the other mainstay heroes are so much cheaper. And so I think bringing him, like, you can bring Percy and Hilda for 10 points
80
less.
Points, yeah.
10 points less, right? Like, that's a significant amount of power in that you're not bringing because you bring Bilbo. Yeah. So
let's get onto another utility piece that can shut down heroes. We've got Gandalf the Grey. Not white, we're doing grey.
Definitely not the white.
Not yet, that's a while away, innit? Alright, so what do we get with Gandalf the Grey? Well, for 170 points, you get a hero of Valor. He is legend in his normal list, but he is a hero of Valor within Lake Town. He is a wizard, infantry hero. He comes with a move of 6, fight of 5, strength of 4, defense of 5, 1 attack, 3 wounds, courage 7, huge, might of 3, 6 will, and 3 fate. He has the Staff of Power. Staff of Power gives him a free will every turn. Comes with Glamdring and Naya. And Glamdring is an elven hand-and-a-half sword. Additionally, it increases Gandalf's strength by 1 when making strikes. Very good. So it takes him to strength 5, which is a pretty solid place to be. His ring of elven whatever allows him to reroll dice when making fate rolls. Very solid as well. Makes him very hard to kill. Basically takes him to be a 5-wound hero, essentially, really.
Yeah, pretty much.
The math coming out on that. Obviously there's ways around it, but yeah, that's beside the point. Heroic actions, he comes with Resolve, Channeling, and Strike, so very solid. Strike, pretty good. He comes at a base value of 5, which is one of the higher ones in your army, with the 3 might.
And the Elven Blade.
And the Elven Blade, so he's a solid hero, for clutch moments to bring in for it. He's a very good hero to bring in for a kill, especially on a hero that's been dismounted, which he can do very easily.
Yes.
Because, well, his options, quickly, he can bring a horse. You bring him on a horse. 10 points. It amplifies it doubles, actually, quadruples his killing power, doubles his chance to win fights.
Yes.
His magical powers: Blinding Light on a 2+, Terrifying Aura on a 2+, Immobilize on a 3+, Command on a 4+, with Immobilize and Command being 12-inch range, Protection of the Valor on a 4+, Strengthened Will on a 12-inch range 4+, A Collapsed Rocks for 6 inches on a 5+, and a Sorcerer's Blast on a 5+, also on 12 inches. So some really good powers here. Blinding Light basically gives you shooting dominance against basically anything. Terrifying Aura, it makes him unchargeable. Well, not chargeable. It means he has Terror. Immobilize, solid for shutting down heroes. Command, solid for pulling out heroes. Protection of the Valor, that restores his fate.
Yes, it restores fate.
Or is that? It does something. No, that's. We're really bad at this, aren't we?
Protection of the Valor is the immune to spells.
Yes, is the spell resistance. I think. Yes. Strength and Will, very solid. Meme potential. We'll talk about that in a second. Collapsed Rocks doesn't come up often unless you're cheating like I am. And Sorcerer's Blast is a great ability for knocking down heroes. So, what do we think of Gandalf?
I think Gandalf the Grey in any of his renditions is an absolute bargain. I think bringing any of the heroes of power any of the wizards of power are just fantastic choices. And I think I'm a little bit upset to see there's no cart with this one, but that's okay. I still think he's fantastic.
Yes.
The way you can interact with him in a late turn list, being a hero of valor, being a model that still leads models and is as powerful as a wizard can be, like it's on par, in my opinion, of bringing something like Gandalf the White in a Gondor list. It's just such a powerful utility thing that still brings the troops you need. And he can bring so many tricks to this army, especially when it comes to using the immobilizers, commands, sword blast, and the blinding light. I think those 4 are basically the core of how this model wants to play most lists. It's if you're fighting against any army or shooting, chuck up a blinding light. Suddenly, you've got more than likely like 12 to 15 bow shots firing into very little your opponent can do back. You have absolute dominance when it comes to leading lines. Every time you win priority, not only are you making those moves and forcing your opponent to call heroics that you can match because you probably have more might than them in the first place, but then if you win that roll-off, you just immobilize one of their big heroes. And you just ignore them for a turn. And you can do that like 3 or 4 turns in a row because you can keep momentum going with this army so easily. You have the Sword Blast to dismount everything in the world. Throw a random dude 4 inches back into the horse of Gilgalad and just laugh in Sorcerer's Blast as you just do that to like everything. It's so powerful. Even just throwing a Sorcerer's Blast onto the hero itself if you don't have a good fling target. Like, yes, they can resist it, but then they're choosing, do I resist this blast, or do I resist the immobilize that's going to come out 4 turns later?
The channeled immobilize for halving fight.
Like, there are so many things that they want to be stopping that, stopping on, will points, that they might actually freeze and go, I don't know if this is what I should stop or not. And I think most people, when it comes to losing their horse, will get too greedy with it. I'll see a 3 will hero drop 2 will and a might point to keep the horse, only to have 1 will for next turn and just have the exact same thing happen.
Exactly.
Like, it's this mod. I could go on for 10 years about how good this mod is.
You can. He is very solid. The main potential we're talking about, Strength and Will, can be cast on any friendlies. So, Mr. Alfred, the Might Giver, spends his will to give might, and then Gandalf Strength and Wills him so that he can keep giving might to other Lake Town heroes. It means that, in some games it will never come up. In some games, especially if it's like a Lords of Battle or To the Death, where you don't actually have to fight your opponent over ground, you can just farm up like an extra 3 to 4 with might points before lines meet. You just sit in the corner and you go, all right, well, listen, I'm farming infinite might. You have to come fight me no matter what your army list is. I'm just going to sit here, shoot my bows and not move, and then we'll fight when you get here. And I'll be an extra 3 might. It's just a really silly but very powerful combo you can do with those 2 combined.
Yes, I think what makes this model so interesting is the idea of the setup. And all wizards have this concept built into it, right? How long does it take for me to get my blanket layered abilities overlapping in the way I need to? Thankfully, Gandalf only has a couple that he really wants to get set up early, that being Blinding Light and Terrifying Aura. Are you playing into a lot of shooting? Channel the Blinding Light. Consider the channeled Terrifying Aura. Yes, it brings you down to 1 might point, but I think more times than not, it's a very powerful combo to bring. If you're not versing a huge shooting army, then you probably don't need the Blinding Light channeled. You could probably just chuck it up for the 1 or 2 turns you actually need it. But I think what really comes into that question is how long can I actually spend strengthening will compared to doing something like a Sorcerer's Blast, or an Immobilize, or a Command, or even a Blinding Light on just the 1 turn that you need to help bridge that gap.
Yeah, as funny as chucking infinite might is, it's not necessarily always as useful as other spells, but it's an option to consider in the missions where you can abuse it. It can be really really silly more than anything. I think
To the Death and Fog of War are the two that jump to mind because you start 24 apart and you don't have ground you need to give.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry, there is so much ground you are able to
yeah,
give.
you can just sit up in the corner and talk to your opponent and be like, okay, just do your movement and I'll roll my shooting attacks and then we'll get here eventually. You know what I mean? But yeah, just excellent overall. I think, as I say here on the slide, he is a great combo with Bain. The annoying, frustrating thing about wizards is putting them into combat puts them at risk of getting tied up and then they can't cast spells. So Bain and Gandalf charge, one dude. Gandalf gets the free hero combat from Bain. Bain goes off to do something else somewhere else and Gandalf runs back out. It's a very solid way to just pick up a kill every turn with Gandalf while making sure he can always cast spells. And just a great way to use him and Bain. You're not getting as many kills elsewhere with Bain, but Gandalf is getting to cast spells every turn. And you're just getting too cheeky, a couple almost guaranteed kills off of Gandalf's, strength 5, maybe even two-handing depending on what you're fighting, so on and so on.
Yeah, definitely.
Alright, on to our next profile. Take it away, Chris, with Percy.
Yes, so we have Percy. He is a man, Lake Town infantry hero, hero of Fortitude for 50 points. His movement 6, fight 3, strength 4, defense 4, 2 attacks, 2 wounds, courage 4. He has 3 points of might, 1 will, 1 fate. He is equipped with sword and a bow as his war gear options. He has heroic accuracy as his only heroic, and he has a special rule called Archers This Way. What this rule means is Percy, as well as all Lake Town militia within 6 of him, re-roll 1s to hit when making bow shots. It's like the opposite of poison. He's a fantastic hero. He's a hero of Fortitude for 50 points, and he has 3 might. Like, that's exactly what you want at that sort of tier.
The 3+ shoot as well is a pretty big up on him.
Yeah, definitely, yes. I think he is a really nice plug-in to bring with Bard. I think those two together means that you have, on game start, 6 points of might invested into shooting if you need it to be. Like, that's crazy amounts of killing power if you're playing something like Assassination. And Bard does the 1-2 perfectly with Percy.
Yeah, I find Percy to be a really solid addition. He brings a lot to the list for very little points. The only thing that's kind of unfortunate is he doesn't bring the march, which kind of makes a captain necessary, especially since you're an all-foot army. You could argue this army doesn't actually necessarily even need march, I think, because of the amount of heroics you can get out. Like, the missions where march is super important, I think you can maybe try and make up for it by flinging yourself with your free heroics and doing stuff. But generally speaking, I think this army benefits a lot from having a captain with march, but not 100% necessary. And I think bringing Percy is a very solid choice. I think heroic accuracy is actually really big in this army because of Bard. So him having it is a really nice sort of combo with that. He really supplements you really well. Again, I think this army at low points with Bard, Percy, and like 30-ish guys, 500 points, it's very hard to match that shooting. So you can just sit in your line, call your heroic accuracy, snipe at all their horses or whatever you want to deal with, snipe any important buff heroes. It's just a very solid thing to bring into this list.
Yeah, I think this model is insanely valuable at the lower points value, and as you climb into that slightly higher points value, yeah, he drops off a little bit, but he's still 3 points of might for 50 points. Like, if you look at him as literally nothing other than 3 points of might at 50 points, that leads 12 warriors, he is a steal. Add on top of that the way he can buff those archers in your army, whilst probably not many of them, it will be enough to make it relevant every now and then, right?
I think you're probably looking at about 2 extra hits a turn. I think 10 to 12 bow shots is a pretty normal amount with this list. Including himself, like especially like the fact he's in a 3+ shoot means he rerolls most, half his misses are rerolls. So gives him a really solid accuracy profile, and an extra 2 shots a turn never hurt you.
Yeah, it's such an interesting profile because it fits in really nicely in that points value setting. And it fits in really well, like I said earlier, alongside Bard. I think you can really struggle to get a lot of good uses out of him on his own, because he just has a strength 2 bow. It's nothing fancy. And like Esgoth bows from Dale, for example, are just better in every way, and he struggles compared to even a normal captain from that list, even with the extra point of might. But I think just because of the way he can plug into the list, alongside your other buffs, alongside the way that your infantry work with him, he just ends up feeling a really nice spot, basically. And yeah. I think I would say anywhere between that sort of 450 to 500 point range and above, he becomes a mainstay in almost every single lake town list.
Yeah,
So.
yeah, unless you're really hungry for March, which let's talk about the Lake Town Militia Captain. So, for 40 points, you get a man Lake Town Infantry Hero of Fortitude. Move of 6, fight of 3, strength of 4, defense of 5, 2 attacks, 2 wounds, courage 4, 2 might, 1 will, 1 fate. He comes with an armor, pick, and a spear. So, very solid basic war gear there. Having a spear, I think, on a hero is really nice. And he can bring a shield. He comes with Heroic March like all captains. Now, as a combat profile, he's pretty mediocre. The thing that stands out to me as being really nice on him is access to the pick base. Being able to go to Strength 5, especially comboing with Bain, as we talked about earlier, gives him a very solid sort of... It makes up for Bane's low killing power by bringing you up to Strength 5 against, D5 or D7. And the spear means he has a bit of versatility. If he can't quite make it into a fight, you're just poking Strength 4 into a fight. Like if you're trying to snipe a horse, it's really nice. Yeah, nothing too special about him. The fact that you're an all-foot army makes March very valuable. That's it. Anything else from you, Chris?
He's the first model in this army to be equipped with a shield. He is your 4 dice blocking hero.
No, as a hero, yes. He's the only hero with a shield. Yeah.
And, that is actually a really big deal. Being able to 4 dice shield. He is a fight 4 model. Treat him like one with Bain, with Bard in the list. He's a fight 4 dice shielder. Yes, he's only fight 4, but 4 dice means that he will win most fights he is in. He is reliable. He is a mainstay of the list. He's defense 6, which means strength 3 will struggle against him.
He's your toughest hero, yeah.
He does a lot of things that this army needs you to do. And because of that, I would argue he is probably, other than Bard himself, he's probably the most important model to consider unless you bring allies into this list.
Yeah, unless you're doing something specific as well. I think, like I said, I think this army can run without the march. You just need to know, the limitations you're putting on yourself when you go into the game. I think if you, you'll have to play around it, but you can with this army.
You can, don't get me wrong.
But it's also very nice to just have it. I think it's a very... he's cheap. He's 40 points base, 45 with the shield. You bring the shield always. 45 points, just bring March. Just do it.
Even if you're not paying for the shield, even if you're just looking at it for 40 points, I would still bring him in almost every single list. Yes. And I said this earlier, for 220 points, you get this guy with a shield, you get Bard on a horse with the armor, and you get Alfred. That gives you potential access to 8 points of March. Straight off the bat. And that's before 8 points of might, before you start adding troops to it. It's just a really nice combo to have.
Yeah, and now let's get onto the Lake Town Militia themselves. Take it away, Chris.
Yes, so you have the Lake Town Militia coming in at 5 points. They are a man Lake Town infantry warrior. Their movement of 6, fight value of 2, 4+ shoot value. Their strength of 3, their defense is 4, they have 1 attack, 1 wound, courage of 3. They're equipped with, and this is what makes them really powerful, they're equipped with armor, and their second war gear option is either a sword or an axe. They have, for additional war gear options, a bow, a shield, and a spear, all of which for 1 point. And they have a special rule, which is a passive, which is Onwards, Men of Escaroth. Lake Town militia that are within 3 inches of a friendly Lake Town hero model, who in combat do not need to take courage tests for being broken. It's just one of those cheeky little rules that if your army gets tied up because your opponent want to move off, or you're out of might and they went first, your models don't flee as easily as they might. It's just a really nice thing to have, and it incentivizes you to bring more heroes.
Yeah, and being an army with a lot of heroes but no way to buff your army's courage, stuck at courage 3, it's really nice. It comes up not that often, I find, but when it comes up, you're like, oh, that's really useful. Especially, again, because, if someone tries, if you're both, relatively similar model count as you both break simultaneously, and someone tries to, go into your daughters or something, those daughters give you a 3-inch, ignore the courage break. Yes. And, that can really come in handy on, those later turns in the mid-game.
It's just really good. And they're only 5 point space as well. It means that they're either going to be 6 points or 7 points. And in my opinion, they're either going to be 6 points because they have a shield, or they're going to be 7 points with a bow spear or a bow shield. Oh, sorry, a spear shear.
Yeah, I think you bring shield spear most of the time. I think it's worth doing. Going to defense 5 is nice. Makes you a lot tougher against heroes. Also makes piercing strikes a lot safer.
Yeah.
And I think piercing strikes are a big part of this unit's strength. I think most of them should be swords. Axes. Can just chop your swords off, get the axes. I'm just, I'm a big fan of being able to go to strength 4, and because you're only fight 2/3, you're not going to get to feint a lot, and it doesn't feel great.
Yes.
Stabbing just is rough.
Yeah.
And so I definitely think all your bows should bring axes, because being D4 and stabbing yourself on 5 is really rough. Your shield guys, you can see either way. I think, though, generally speaking, I would just go 80-90% axes, bring a few swords, because occasionally it'll be useful, because some games axes are quite low impact, some games they're very high impact, whereas swords are sort of more evened out. But I just think that the sword impact is very, very low, and the axe impact is very, very high, to the point where I'd almost bring all axes.
Yeah, I mean, the axe basically means both sides kill quicker, right? Every time you lose a fight, you're going to be dying quick. Every time you win a fight, the dream is you're killing quick. And so if you are someone who's comfortable taking the one-for-one trades, quote-unquote, then axe-heavy lists can be really good. When I play Mordor, I bring something similar. I bring, like, almost half my models equipped with axes, and I bring then a very small scattering of maces and swords as my other two variants. It's just one of those things, models that can bring multiple war gear base suddenly go from being a really average pick to being a very powerful pick, because they have that variation with no additional cost built in. Yeah. And I think this model really excels at doing that, and they better excel at it because they're your only troop choice in the list. They're the only thing that you can play around with your heroes.
Yeah, the one slightly unfortunate thing is this army can't bring an actual banner, which, I mean, you have a 12-inch banner. And you're like, why do I need a banner? But once you're getting to, 750, 800 points, especially in a more hoardy list, bringing a banner is, like, having a secondary banner just gives you a lot of flexibility, a lot of, options. It scores you points in some scenarios, and it's just nice as an option to have. And the fact that you don't have it is sort of, and also a Warhorn as well, not an option either. So, if you're in a really terror-heavy meta, you can't be like, I'm going to take a Warhorn in to counter that. Which are both unfortunate, and they're things to consider. But overall, this is a very solid profile, and you don't feel bad making your entire army out of these guys.
Yes, it rounds out your list really well, I find.
And cheap 4+ shoot bows are never bad.
Yes, like, it's not uncommon for you to be 4, 5, 6 bows up on your opponent when you come to the shooting engagements. And to actually leverage that, because you are defense 5 on your front line, if you're going into a strength 2 shooting list, you are killing them the same amount that they're killing you, basically. That lower defense value doesn't actually come up a huge amount. And so suddenly, the bow number advantage is just an advantage. It doesn't come with the caveat of the lower defense.
Especially when Bard can just burn, like, if it's a shooting army that has a relatively low count, Bard can just be like, I'm going to burn might to just blow these guys up.
Yes, I've seen Lake Town armies just absolutely mulch Rivendell shooting, because they just bring more bows, they have Bard, they have Percy, they have ways of miting through the shooting parts of the Elven list, and once the Elven list moves, it loses so much of its shooting power, and it basically has to walk at you. And the Lake Town's shooting advantage just gets bigger and bigger and bigger the longer that game
Bard
goes.
is a huge part of that. Racking up kills on Bard. Like, there are times when you roll a 2 on your first shot with Bard and you're like, I want to might this and just take another shot. And it's not even that's a totally valid approach to using his might.
Like, if that 5 points nets you 1 kill because your second or third shot that turn ends up getting the kill, like, that 5 points is going to make up. Even an Orc Warrior costs 5 points. Like, if you look at might at roughly 5 points per might point, it just means that you're trading really well, and you're trading positive almost every time you call it with that strength 4 bow. And Alfred means that half the time you can just get those might points back, either immediately or later in the game.
Yeah, exactly. And because you have a very high might army, Bard's might isn't necessarily, super high value. It's not something you have to conserve for really important things. And you have a couple other strike heroes in your list, potentially. You can have a wizard. You have a lot of different things that can offset him burning through his might and not having a lot.
Exactly.
And the fact that he gets free hero combats just means he doesn't even care that much.
Yes. And I think it's that comboed with the way your heroes interact as a whole. You have a huge amount of might, you have a huge amount of power. Leverage it in a way that actually means that your army does so much. And all these warriors need to do is force your opponent to close that gap because of the shooting, and be the cheerleaders who stand in place and die slowly enough.
And support Bain.
Yes, exactly.
It's endeavor to kill everything.
Like, literally, all this army needs to do is ensure that most of their heroes are getting either a winning fight or kill most turns, and the rest of the army is either spear supporting or shielding. Like, this is an army that really encapsulates the idea of you have 3 dice in every single fight, because you're shielding with a banner or you have a spear sport and a banner in every single fight, and you just never not have that minimum.
Yeah, and with that, we've covered all the profiles. We're going to take a little break, and then we'll be back with the allies and army lists.
Alrighty, welcome back. So let's jump straight into our allies. We have a few really good allies that offset the biggest weaknesses of this army, that being you don't have any elites or cavalry, and of course you don't have that really high defense that other models can bring. So what are our allies that we can bring?
So the biggest and most important ones are your two big greens. That would be Thranduil's Halls and Thorin's Company. Not Thorin's Company. Erebor Reclaimed and Iron Hills. And Iron Hills. I think all three of those are your greens.
Correct. Yes.
Check that. But yes, those are your three main ones, and those are all really solid allies, both for bringing a Lake Town force with an addition, or Lake Town is a great army to add to these lists, because all three of these lists struggle to get to a high model count. And so the cheapness of Lake Town heroes and Lake Town militia is a great, add 200 points to bring like 20 models and 4 to 5 might. Sure.
It's just insane to be able to bring that into an army. Like, I personally love the idea of bringing these guys into a Mirkwood army, into a Thranduil's Halls army. Because suddenly, you have those Fight 6 elites, you have that high killing power with and around Thranduil, you have Legolas in the list, and then suddenly, you can combo Percy with Legolas the same way Bard combos with Percy. And you can bring a huge amount of models, either as just ways to buff off that elven line, because they're going to be all your spear supports, or it's just ways to fill out ranks, because otherwise you have a very elite army with the elves. And dwarves can do the same thing, obviously in very different ways, with either Thorin or Dane or some of the other dwarves from Erebor Reclaimed, stuff like that.
And that's the great thing, you have so many different options. I think if you're playing Thranduil's or Iron Hills, I think either the two heroes talked about Percy captain, Hilda captain, something like that, and then 24 guys. Adding that into Iron Hills or Mirkwood is really solid, or even the Bard, Alfred, 17 guys. That's a really solid add to any army, I think, as well, for fairly cheap. You don't need to bring the daughters. You don't need to worry about babysitting them. You're bringing Bard to be, your 12-inch banner for your whole army, essentially.
Yes.
Because you're going to mix spear supports into your guys, and then maybe you're going to bring a secondary banner so you can, if you have Thranduil can go really hard on the flank while not losing your banner in the center of your line.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. You have a lot of options with them. My personal favorite, the one I really enjoy running, is bringing King Thorin for the triple free heroic combats each turn. That's the list I'll be talking about when I talk about allies. It is a silly strong list.
Yes, it has, it's one of those armies that really plays with the opponent in a really, really mind-gamey sort of way. I don't know how many people have ever had that turn where they play into, a Rangers, or into a army similar to this, or a hero hammer like an MSU style.
Or even just, Riders of Theoden.
Riders of Theoden, and your opponent says, I'm going to call a strike with Theoden. What would you like to do? And you say, oh, I'm not going to call anything. They go, cool. Gambling's calling a strike. AMA's calling a strike. Dan Helm's calling a strike. Dan Wine's calling a strike. And they just keep going. And this army
as well, yeah.
And they do the same thing, right? And they go, this one's a strike. That's a defense. That's a combat. That's a combat. That's a combat. That's a this. That's a... And they just don't stop. And this army makes your opponent feel like you're doing the same thing, right? You go, a free heroic with King Thorin, a free heroic with Bard, a free heroic with Bain, and then finally, on the fourth call, you go, oh, I'll spend a might point this time.
Yeah.
It's just such a big mind game.
And with all the exaltations of this list, let's get into the I Call 3 free heroic combats list. Get that phrase just, pat down, because you're going to have to tell your opponent that every single turn. So, Bard on horse with armor, Alfred, Sigrid and Tilda. 5 Lake Town Militia with shields, 5 Lake Town Militia with spearbow, 5 Lake Town Militia with spear and shield. A Captain of Lake Town with a shield, 5 Lake Town Militia with shields, 4 Lake Town Militia with spear and bow, and 2 Lake Town Militia with spear and shield. Next up, Bain, Son of Bard, 3 Lake Town Militia with a shield, and 1 Lake Town Militia with bow and spear. And finally, we got Thorin, King Under the Mountain with Wargoat and Orkist, 9 Iron Hill Dwarves with spears, and 1 Iron Hill Goat Rider with a War Spear. Now, real quick, a neat option you could also bring is swapping through those spears to be crossbows, just ups your shooting count a lot. I think it's personal preference. I really want to try running that version of this list, and then alternatively dropping the Goat just to bring a little bit more of a model count. I like the Goat as a Bane buddy. It gives you another option for someone to send along with Bane.
And I think a goat is the perfect model to do it as well.
Yeah, the goat brings a lot of killing power, which makes up for Bane's low killing power. It can knock prone to keep Bane safe. It can run off 8 inches to go, drop somewhere else. There's a lot of options with the goat, and I think it's a really good, 20 points to sort of attach to Bane and his free heroics and just to have a lot of threat. Because, even that, like, Bane and a goat charging a low-tier captain hero, it's very scary.
It is, yes.
So I think it's very solid. What do you think of this list overall? So we talked about the free hero combats. What about the rest of the list? What do the dwarves bring to this army?
So this list is a very well-crafted list. Obviously, it's one that, you've taken to events. I think the reason why this list works so well is because what dwarves bring. They bring high strength, that being strength 4. They bring high fight, that being fight 4. And they bring up to defense of 8 if you get the shield wall working in your favor as a special rule. Like, that is 3 incredible stats to offset the fight 3, strength 3, and defense 5 of the rest of your army.
Yes, this list, the dwarves really patch your weaknesses here. I think my favorite game I played with this list was the game where I played against your Lothlorien, where Celeborn and his detachment of 12-ish elves was off on a flank and a choke point, and I just sent 8 dwarves there, and they sat there for the entire game while Thorin ran off, Bard ran off, and just cut through the rest of your army. I think that sort of exemplified what this list can do. I think it's very interesting how versatile you can be with these dwarves. These dwarves can be your front line, they can be your supports, they can go operate on their own. Obviously, ideally, you want to have them with Lake Towners because the banner is given to the Lake Towners. If you only have dwarves fighting, they won't get a banner. Yeah. Which is unfortunate, but not even necessarily that big a deal, because in those situations where the dwarves are operating on their own, they're going to hold that choke point with them at their max, where they don't, where your opponent doesn't want to fight them because of what they do in that position. And then when they're just a part of your line, you'll basically always have, just either poke a spear in behind the dwarf or have the dwarf spear support a Lake Towner, and you're all good. Yeah. Thorin also has a great little thing where he gets Dubekar from himself, so he's a banner for himself. So the one sort of downside of allying to Bard is that Bard isn't a banner for any other heroes except Lake Town heroes. Thorin kind of just ignores this because he's a banner for himself. Yes. Unfortunately, he's not a banner for the Iron Hill dwarves. Whatever, who cares? That's a problem with Erebor claim that's not relevant here. But he is a banner for himself, which means he can operate really well on his own. He brings D8, he brings, Orcist, he can be, two-handing to go for kills. If you're ever fighting Urukai or Goblin or Orc heroes, he's just insane. And the free hero combats every turn, they want to just, the triple threat, it's so, how do you deal with that? Your opponent just goes, I'm going to call 3 heroics, and I'm spending no might. What are you going to do, match me? You can only do that, maybe 3 times a game.
If
before
that.
You're out of might. Yeah, if you've got 3 might heroes, cool, you can match me for 3 times, but also 2 of my heroes are fight 6. Bard and Thorin are both fight 6, which is just such a monstrous value to be at because so few heroes match that. And the ones that do are so expensive. They're way more expensive than Thorin and Bard are, unless they, there's very rare exceptions. Most of the fight 6 heroes, especially the mountain ones, are, pushing 160 to 180 at least.
Yeah, and it's just such a hard, like I said, mind game to play as the person on the other side of that table. Because the way you beat this list is honing down what you are doing to a quick, compact game. The longer you let those 3 free heroics rack up kills, the worse you're gonna be in the long run. So you need to turn this game into as quick of a game as you can. Like, if you have 2 or 3 heroes with a couple of might points each on them, you want to be blowing all of your might as quickly as you can, blowing through as many, Lake Town Militia as you physically can. Like, the dream is each of your heroes are killing 4 models a turn, and you're just mowing through numbers. If you can do that, you're going to be in a great place to break the Lake Town in that 3 or 4 turns, and hope that the end condition can trigger soon after.
Or go after the daughters. That's a big part. Like, trying to break through, snipe the daughters, put a lot of pressure on the Lake Town player, because for what this is, it's a relatively low actual warrior count. It's about 40 warriors.
40 warriors on the dot.
Which, there's 10 dwarves. That's pretty solid, but the rest is D5. Some of it's going to be on, child protection duty. You can get through this list relatively quickly if it gets a bad spot. And then just, even if you don't have to break them, you just have to, if you get, a slight numbers advantage and you can send off 2 dudes onto the daughters, that's a lot of pressure. Either Bard or Bain or even Thorin are going to have to go back, clean up, 2 dudes in a really off spot just to stop the daughters going down, because it's so bad for this army if that happens.
Yes. And, that's exactly it, right? This army, every single time I've beaten this list, it has been because I was able to bully down the Lake Town side of the list and then snipe out a key part of the list. There's been a couple of times I've been able to take out Bard. There's a couple of times I took out one of the kids. Sometimes as I take out Bain and cripple Thorin. Like, there are ways around that list, and you need to find your little entry point, whether that's a pocket of, models that are just near the captain of Lake Town, and you use your big scary Fight 5 hero to just mulch that whole pocket up, or whether you're using something like cheeky movement tactics, or just doing a burn game with your opponent and go, I'm going to burn all my resources and end the game, and you have too many resources to burn the speed I'm burning. And that's kind of your two ways of forcing this list to play.
The way to counter this list is to try go far. And obviously, as the Lake Town player, you want to do everything you can to slow it down. You want to use your, really powerful shooting to try and dismount any big killer heroes. That's, I actually ironically think, burning 2 might to dismount like a 200-point hero. Just do it.
Yeah.
You have, 9 might, even ignoring Alfred, is a solid starting base. Ignoring the fact you get 3 free heroics a turn. Like, ignoring even just that, 9 might is a solid base. And then, up to 12 with Alfred. And then, even if you call just, 2 turns of free hero combats, that's, 6 might. That's, you've spent 15 to 18 might already. And the longer the game goes, that can be 21, 24. It's that similar thing with, the old gambling banner where you could just unironically spend 20 plus might a game.
And still have 15 points of might.
Not quite as bad. Not quite as bad. but
it's still definitely...
It's the same concept.
Yeah.
Now, let's move on to our next list. This one's from you, Chris. Take us away with the burglary list.
Yes. So, this list has Bard the Bowman on horse with armor. You have Alfred. You have Sigrid and Tilda. You have 5 Lake Town Militia with shield. 3 Militia with shield and spear. And 5 Militia with bow and spear. All of that comes in Bard's warband. You then get Percy's warband. That warband has 5 Militia with shield, 2 with spear and shield, and 5 with bow and spear. You then have Helga and her warband of 6 Militia with shield, 3 Militia with shield and spear, 3 Militia with bow and spear. You have Bilbo on his own. You have a captain with 5 Militia with just a shield. You have 4 Militia with bow and spear. And then in the final warband, you have Bain with 3 Lake Town Militia with shield. So this army has 13 points of might at game start, and it has 58 models, 16 of which are equipped with a bow, and that is excluding, I believe.
It's excluding Alfred, Bard and Percy, yes.
Yeah. It is a laughable amount of bow shots you have on this list. And it's incredible how many models you can bring, despite you still have this many heroes. Like, you have, 9 heroes in the list? Obviously.
Okay, Sigrid, Tilda, and Alfred aren't really heroes. You have 6 heroes, 5 with decent combat ability. That's still not too bad. That's like, none of those are, strong heroes outside Bard, really.
Yes.
But they're acceptable heroes. And then you've got the tech in Bilbo to shut down enemy heroes. You've got the captain for the marches, Percy for the buffs, Hilda for the buffs.
Yeah.
There's a lot to this list, and all these heroes work really well together and synergize well. We've talked about all these different profiles and what they each bring individually. And Hilda and Percy and this horde list is at higher points where they shine, because there's enough models that you can keep the game going long enough to get the most out of, the +1 to wound, the shooting rerolls, especially like deploying all 16 bows together at the center if your opponent just can't match your shooting. And just maxing out, getting like 3 extra hits a turn from Percy, calling accuracies with Percy, and just going ham and just shooting down every single horse on the other side.
And like, that's not even a bad tactic because of the way Alfred interacts with this list, right? Like, yes, it can sometimes feel a bit, bad to be throwing around might points like that on calling an accuracy. Like, accuracy on paper is a really good ability, but in games, not many people use it, right? It's the exact same way that things like a heroic challenge can be really powerful or can be really hard to get right.
Useless almost in some games.
Yeah, and it's like, accuracy is one of those ones that because you have the insurance policy called Alfred for 20 points, accuracies are fine. And because you have Bard on the list, accuracies go from being fine to being holy hell, how do I keep heroes on their horses? Like, it's just...
Yeah, you can't put in the way, or even just like, if you have a second line that's D4 for whatever reason.
Oh my gosh, they melt.
Bard just going, pew, 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 4+ to kill. It's like... What do I do?
If 5's on the other guys as well.
Yeah, even like most armies, like D6 armies go down on 5s. Like, that's pretty rough.
Yeah. It's scary being able to deal this much damage at long range. and then knowing that your opponent probably doesn't have the resources left by the time they reach you to play a quick burn game against you, and so Bard and his son actually get to do the free hero combats for 4 or 5 turns. And suddenly, like I said earlier, if you're expecting both of them together to get 4 kills a turn, that's suddenly across 5 turns 20 kills. Like, show me an army that's not going to break in 20 kills from those heroes plus the rest of your army over 5 turns,
especially
plus
the shooting. Yeah, especially when you take that into account.
Like, those heroes alone could break you if you include the shooting that happens beforehand. It's crazy how good this list can be.
Yes. Now, again, you are now stuck at fight 3 maximum. A lot of your heroes are very vulnerable. However, Bilbo is a nice tech piece here.
Yes. And Bilbo functions so similarly to the way Frodo does, is if you can get him in the right spots, he can just frustrate your opponent so much. It's so many headaches dealing with the fear tactic of, oh, but what if, Bilbo touches me and suddenly I'm fight 4, or suddenly fight 3, I'm max in fight 5, and then Bard and Bain say, we're both calling a combat, what you gonna do, buddy?
Yeah, you're within 6 inches of Bain, Bain and Bilbo are already fight 10 essentially.
It's just,
even Bain calling the combats to get Bilbo into position is a very solid way to run it.
And it's just so hard to deal with it because it's free stats that are being used in a way that your opponent often doesn't want to do, right? Because your opponent wants to say, every single might point on my list is being used on a combat, and I'm killing models every single turn. But Bilbo being combat slingshot with either one of any of your heroes, actually, other than probably, even the captain, actually.
Or even Helga. Fine. Like Helga, him combat slingshotting to bring a +1 to wound if a hero is fighting, 2 Lake Towners and then they suddenly rock up. 2 Lake Towners, they go pierce, they +1 to wound. Like, that's scary.
It is. And it's like, how do you deal with that as your opponent when all you're wanting to do is burn your opponent's model count down? The answer is you can't. You have to call safety strikes. You have to plan around what they're going to do. Unless you happen to be Thrall on a model like that, there's not a huge amount you will be doing that's actually going to be relevant in terms of road blocking this army. And I think that's the hard part, right? This army can access kills in any part of the game and can do it well.
Yeah, this is a very solid way to run the list. I do think I'd want to try something like this, like a pure Lake Town list. And I'll get into my pure Lake Town list I want to get to next with Let's Blast, with bringing, again, Bard with armor and horse, with Alfred, Sigrid, 6 Lake Town Militia with shields, 6 with spear and bow, 3 with spear, shield, and Raza.
Very good.
Gandalf the Grey on horse with 8 Lake Town Militia with shield, 4 Lake Town Militia with shield and spear, and 4 Lake Town Militia with bow and spear. Percy bringing 4 Lake Town Militia with shields, 4 Lake Town Militia with spear and shields, and 4 Lake Town Militia with bow and spears. And then finally, Bain, son of Bard, with 1 Lake Town Militia with a shield, bringing us with 10 to 13 might, depending on how you roll Alfred, 49 total models with 44 warriors, 43 warriors, and 15 bows, bringing in the Percy bow there, and then Bard as well.
Yeah, I just love the addition of Raza. What a clever choice.
Yeah, Raza's a pretty good model, especially when you cheeky him in there for free.
Yeah, why is he a shield, though? That's weird.
Listen, one of the Lake Towners has Raza attached on top of him.
Oh, blue tack, right?
Yeah,
no, magnets,
yeah. That's really good for resin.
Yeah, exactly. Mistakes aside, though, I think this is a very clever list. Like, you have a very high model count still, considering you're bringing 2, in my opinion anyway, over 170 point models, being Gandalf the Grey at 180, and you basically look at Bard at being a roughly 200 point model.
Yes.
Like, you have 2 very expensive models, and you still have 49 models as your model count. That's insane.
It is very solid, and like we said, Gandalf's very strong here. This is a list where I didn't bring a Captain for March. I brought Percy because I don't necessarily. This is the kind of list where I don't think you necessarily need it. You got the wizard to pull people out, force the issue in that regard. And it's fine. I think it's also a list where Percy's very solid because with that wizard you can choose to play really defensive. You can get a lot of use out of him. I think bringing the captain is perfectly reasonable as an option. You mess around with your points a little, you get an extra model out of it because it's 5 points cheaper.
Yes.
But overall, I think either way, this has a lot of the same strengths we have talked about, and it has a wizard.
Yes. And the wizard just changes the ballpark completely. Like, people talk about wizards as, they can be good, they can be this, they can be that. It is insane what wizards can do.
I mean, wizards are bringing you another infinite resource, essentially.
Yes. And Gandalf, in my opinion, is probably one of the 3 best wizards under 200 points in the game. Like, he brings so much power on such a small base size, but he has such a big reach with his powers as well. Like, 22 inches is the range of most of his relevant powers. That's a huge bubble of influence. He can be on one side of your battle line, Bard can be in the middle, and you can have Percy and Bain, trending towards the other side of your battle line, and Gandalf can be transfixing the model Bain is about to go and fight. Yeah, like, it's insane how much power comes out of that list.
Yeah, I think, and also, like I said, it's not the way that this list, the longer the game goes on, the better it is. You're like, wizards have that with every wizard. Every wizard wants the game to go on, especially, assuming they have an infinite will. Which, any of the stuff of power wizards, so him, Saruman, they benefit from the game continuing.
Yes.
And so bringing Gandalf here, it just plays into your core strategy with this list of just trying to extend the game as long as possible to get the most out of your free heroics, and now to get the most out of your free will every turn. Because it means even once you run out of will, depending on what spell you want to cast, you got 2+ or 5+ if you're casting Sorcerer's Blasts or whatever, or, Mobilizers and Transfixes. Just chucking those out every turn, it's just so frustrating to deal with as you run out of will, run out of might. You can't call moves to get onto him. Yes. And because you have this high might pool base, you're going to have might left that your opponent doesn't. So once you get to that mid to end game, you can just call a move to cast a spell and charge.
Yeah, and I think that's where Gandalf really starts to shine, is in that sort of like when your opponent goes down to 3 or less might, that's when Gandalf goes from being powerful to just absolutely unstoppable. To
charge, strike, dual hand with Glamdring. He's there with, even just like a captain and like a spear support. They win the fight for him because, you've struck and they can't even strike back because you maybe transfix them.
Yes.
And then Gandalf just goes, Glamdring, bleh.
Like, Gandalf is unironically Bane's best friend in this list.
Yes, Bain and Gandalf, like we've talked about, the Bain buddy. In this list, the Bain buddy is Gandalf.
Yes. And whether that's across the board with magic powers or right next to him calling the combat and going two-hand for the coup de grace, like, Gandalf just answers so many important gaps in this list. Now, obviously, you still have the one giant gap of no big elites to really play with and things like that. And obviously, an army that can burn through you quickly will still burn through you quickly. Gandalf doesn't fix that entirely. But what Gandalf does is it unlocks that late game from being, sometimes in your favor to almost always being a game that you dominate.
This just makes you really good at playing a kiting game.
Yes,
you can be really obnoxious with this list on just, walking back, shooting, Sorcerer's Blasting every turn. Source blast some heroes and they're moving half for a turn.
Yep.
Now their whole army has to wait to, if it's a big hero, you need that hero to be part of your army when the fight starts. Now you have to wait, if he gets knocked down twice, it's a whole turn of movement essentially erased.
Yeah. And like sometimes that can translate to being 2 or even 3 turns out of the combat.
If they're the one who actually gets blasted back 6 inches, then they have to move half, and then
yes,
it's so frustrating to deal with, and they're just again extends the game, and you want the game to extend because you have the longer the game goes on, the better Lake Town is because of the compounding advantages you have built into the list.
Yes. And with that, I think we should jump into our final thoughts.
Yeah. Right. Well, I love Lake Town. It's a great army. It's probably the army I've played the most games on, I think, realistically.
Yeah, definitely.
Maybe like Gondor Fiefdoms if I call them combined, because I've played a lot across those two combined, but definitely up there. And definitely one of my favorites to play, one of my favorites to paint. Like, it was a really fun, converting / painting experience. I mean, the biggest downside to collecting this is that it's somewhat expensive.
Yeah.
It's definitely one of the more expensive armies in MESBG by far. If you get a little cheeky, you buy some, Warriors of Dale to use. You can take the price down a fair bit. If you dwarf models are expensive, but they're, model to point value wise, bringing Thorin and 10 dwarves is pretty solid in terms of, you get a lot of points for it. But yeah, that's the sort of rough part of this list.
Yes.
That being said, I think it's totally worth it. It's one of the most fun lists to play, one of the nicest lists to paint. A lot of options. Yeah, it's just great overall.
Yeah, I think the thing that really makes this army such a valuable selling point for someone looking to play Forces of Good is this army basically kind of fits that kind of, I can use it as a filler for other armies, I can use it as a standalone army, and I can use it as a really powerful thematic Green Alliance army. And it fits all those really well, and it often covers the gaps of almost any army you're allying it into. We didn't talk about much the yellow allies with this one. You have things like Rivendell, and all 3 of the elven armies I think you can ally to perfectly fine. Like, there's a lot of really interesting ways you can use this army.
If you're not bringing Bard, if you're bringing the double minor hero, I mean, you may as well go yellow. You lose nothing. If you're allying them to an army that also has a non-impactful army bonus,
You need to bring Gandalf if you're doing that, but yes, regardless.
Unit of Valor, you're correct, yes.
Yeah. Regardless, if you are bringing...
Bilbo's a Valor?
No, he's a fortitude, unfortunately.
You're right.
Even if you're not bringing the 12-inch bubble, though, like 6 inches is all you need if you are looking at just, you know...
Yeah, exactly. I don't think it's it's not great to be on a 6 instead of 12. Obviously, you're losing a lot. But I don't think it's the end of the... I mean, a 6-inch banner is still twice as big as the average banner. And if you're bringing a second banner as a part of the army, which if you're doing like a yellow alliance, you probably want to, across what you're looking at, you know... It's worth it. It's worth doing. It's definitely like worth considering bringing this into all of its yellow lists because the tricks are just so efficient.
Yeah, and it just functions so nicely in how it works, right? And I think with the way that the Allies Matrix plays into this army, it just becomes such an accessible army. Like, you buy into it, yes, it can be one of the more expensive armies to buy into, but once you start this army, like, you will find so many other armies that you can just bring a couple of warbands into. You can just bring Bard into. You can just bring this into, just bring that into. And suddenly you've bought half the Hobbit range by accident. Like, this is one of those armies that does that really, really succinctly. It's similar to the way that, you know, you buy a Pelennor Fields box, and so suddenly you fill out the Army of the Dead. Then you buy the 3 Hunters, then you buy the Fellowship, then you go... oh, I should buy some Rohan models. Then
you realize, great company.
Yeah, and then you realize there's 400 Rohan models, so you spent 10k there, and then you just keep buying, and it's
probably still cheaper than buying a Rohan army.
Oh, most definitely. But it's okay. We'll get to the love army of this game soon, right?
That's gonna be 3 hours, maybe, probably. Yeah.
It's fine. We'll do like...
depends on how many Legendary Legions we review.
Yes, I was going to say, we'll do like Legendary Legions part 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Yeah. Then we'll do the army review.
Yeah, you're right. All right, and with that, I think we're done. I think that's all we got. So thank you guys for listening through this. You know, hit the like, hit the subscribe, complain about all my spelling errors. You know, I think that's all very reasonable.
Yeah,
all engagement
definitely.
is good engagement, I reckon, personally. So I always look to find unique ways to engage you guys.
Yep, 100%. That's exactly what you're trying to do. In there. Yeah. But seriously, though, like a comment, any sort of feedback at this point in time would be fantastic. Obviously, with this still being one of our early episodes, we're still trying to find exactly what our footing is.
I think it's perfect.
I think it's definitely getting to a point where we are comfortable with it, but we'd still love to see what you guys think. What are things we could change? What are things that you guys think could be a little bit different? What are some formatting tools? I know we had a question last week. All the lists we write for is 750 points. That's something we decided right at the start to keep it simple for you guys, the listeners. I've realized we haven't been putting that in our actual list recently. They always are list building for 750 points.
If we're building anything else, we'll make a note of it. Yeah. I think for some armies, definitely we will probably do that, depending on if it's interesting or worth noting.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think the goal of our lists here is to sort of give you an idea of what things work well together and how to build for it. Like, if you look at that 750 list and you can, and with the sort of things we've talked about, I think it's very, very workable to sort of scale it up or down, I think.
Yeah, 100%. And with that,
we're all done.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening.
Exactly that. Have a lovely day.